Hey everyone, one of the big topics that is coming out for a lot of us is the role of genes in our hormonal balance, or just the overall well-being of us as women. And so for many of us, it becomes a question of, it's not just a question, but I'm getting so many emails and statements from women who say, my mother had Hashimoto's, and so of course I have Hashimoto's. It's cancer in my family is genetic, right? Everybody has it. Diabetes is genetic. And there's a sense of dispowerment and victimhood that comes along with that, energy of that sort, which has always been very concerning to me. And having done this work in meeting incredible people on this journey, it became very apparent and very well known to me that genes are not the end of the road, and they are not a statement. A sentence rather. They are not a sentence by any means whatsoever. There's a lot that you can do to help yourself. And so the best person that I could think of from the network that I know is my good friend Erika, Dr. Erika Gray, who's here with us. Hi there, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Magdalena.
Hi. So good to have you here. So you're going to see more of her in just a second, but I just want to tell you about her. So Dr. Erika Gray and I met some time ago, and she's a PharmD. She went to University of California in San Francisco. That's where she also lives, and she's also the co-founder and chief medical officer for Toolbox Genomics, which is a new company she just formed. As we are recording it in October 2016, we still say new. By the time you hear this video, it might not be so new. But anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about the incredible stuff that she's doing a little bit later. But I want to just share with you that one of the things that came up for me, which was really important, which was really quite groundbreaking, was when she and I connected some time ago, and she offered to do an analysis of my 23andMe raw data. And there was some stuff that came out of it, which was created so much of an aha in my own health. And predominantly, I think the two things that I remember really distinctly is how quickly I burned through dopamine and just being and that kind of explains my addictive tendencies. And number two is how poor of an estrogen metabolizer I am, which also explains if I don't take care of myself, what a terrible PMS I get and everything that comes with estrogen dominance. So that's why I'm so excited to share this interview with you today. And we've got a whole bunch of questions that came in, and then Erika and I are going to be talking about. So why don't I hand it over to you? And I know you have a point of view on the whole thing about genes not really defining us. So welcome to the call today. And let's just maybe start off with that on your take on that point.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Magdalena. So yes, it's absolutely imperative. And if you take one thing away from this talk today, it's that you're born with these genes, but what you do with them is not absolute. And it's really what you choose to do with them, how you live your life, what foods you put in your mouth, what type of nutrients do you take, how do you exercise, all of those types of things are really going to be what actually make the difference in how your genes express themselves. So I want to play a little game to kind of get us warmed up and to try to hopefully demonstrate this a little bit better. So we're going to play blackjack, and I'm going to be the dealer and the holder and do everything. But I'll explain my thought process behind this in a second. So I'm going to deal a card for myself, and I'm going to deal a card for Magdalena, and another one, and another one. So I'm going to actually shut my eyes. I'm going to hold up the cards for Magdalena. So can you see yours?
Yes.
Okay. So do you know what you want to do?
Actually, I've played blackjack like once in my life, so you put me on the spot, but what do I...
So you're trying to get as close to 21 as possible.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So you look at your cards, and you're going to decide, do you want a hit, which means to try to get closer to 21.
Right.
If you go over 21, you bust.
Okay.
And then I'm the dealer. So if I bust, then
that's right.
Okay.
Okay.
So don't tell me what you want to do yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put yours down now that you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to look at mine. Okay. So the dealer is going to stay. And what would you like to do?
I think I'm gonna stay 2.
You're going to stay 2. All right, so we're going to flip over our cards.
Okay.
So Magdalena had 14, and the dealer had 16. Okay, so I won, but here's my question. Magdalena, why didn't you take a hit? Why didn't you take another card?
Because when I thought about the chances, it was 50-50. I was thinking about the probability of not going above, did I have 14 there or 16?
Yeah, 14.
Right? Yeah, not going over 5, 6, right? So given how many cards there are, I thought it was a 50-50 chance. So I thought, I'm just going to stay. Because a lot of times I used to get bust on just being greedy and going, give me the card, and then losing. And so that was my choice.
So that was great. And you used some fantastic terms in there, which I'm really excited about. So you can see that the cards she got were finite. We can't change those. But the decision-making that went into Magdalena's thought process behind should she stay or take another card was actually pretty in-depth, right? She talked about risk-taking. She talked about being greedy. And then she talked about being safe and just keeping it where she is. So it's the exact same things with our body and our genes. So you're born with the cards. You're dealt those cards, but how you choose to play them is really what is going to be key. So yes, what happens in your family has some bearing, and it's going to be important because you're getting your genes from your parents. But how we live our lives is really going to affect these things called SNPs. They're spelled SNP. They stand for a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's a huge mouthful, but essentially all it means is that the base pairs in your DNA, the ones that should line up, don't. And so because there's this mismatch, so to speak, these enzymes that the DNA code for either work better or they work slower. And if you get some extra letters, then they might work even slower. And if you get some other ones, they might work even faster. And so the beauty of research right now is now we have this better idea of, do we have genes that are slower or do we have ones that are faster? And then we can actually influence those. So big things: diet, sleep, cigarette smoke, hormone exposure, and yes, that can be both environmental hormone exposure or endogenous, from within, and that does include things like birth control pills. What we're exposed to in our environment, those are all going to be things that influence the cards that you're dealt. So you can hear Magdalena going through this rationale. Well, your body's also going through a rationale as you get these various inputs from the environment, and it's making executive decisions. Yes, we're going to do this. No, we're going to do that. But then these genes, if you don't have enough enzymes, then maybe it's going to make it harder for your body to make that decision. So maybe Magdalena would have taken 10 minutes to make a decision instead of the quick 30 seconds she took. And the dealer said, forget it, you're done, goodbye. And so now she's lost that entire opportunity to make money there. So the body may be presented with those types of options depending on what you put in to your body. So definitely be being conscientious, I think, is really important here.
So, and one of the things I really like about this part of the conversation is you realize that it's really back to your own control, your own hands, right? You can take back your health to a very large extent, instead of living in a place of fear. Especially this is for the serious ones, like all the cancers, right? The SNPs for cancers, for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, because people live with this place of fear of, I'm going to get it too. And what kind of a life is that, to be living from a place of fear rather than from a place of abundance and control over feeling like you can really do something about it? So the question I have for you is, oftentimes in our world, we talk about the world of nutrition and integrative medicine, we talk about that things like sleep, right? All the things you mentioned, toxicity, diet, can change the expression of hormones. Can you explain a little bit more about that? What does that expression really mean?
Sure. So an example would be, we have different enzymes in our liver. Some they're kind of affectionately called as CYP, CYP, and we've got hundreds of them. And they all code for different things. And so some of the SIPs that we have actually code for estrogen metabolism. And so in this situation, it's essentially, so when we're talking about the expression of it, and we're talking about these particular genes, we like to use the terms slow metabolizer and fast metabolizer. So if you think about it, it's like running around the track and you have a normal speed and you distribute flowers as you run along the track. And there's people in the audience and they come down and they pick up the flowers and then they take the flowers out of the stadium. That's metabolism. You're taking something, you're breaking it down, and you take it out somewhere else. The idea is that you're either going to then utilize it or you're going to get rid of it. Mm. So what happens is that, let's say you are a slow metabolizer. Well, now instead of running, you're going to walk. Well, you've got these other people who are coming from the stands expecting to pick up these flowers, and they're not there. So they leave, but unfortunately now when the person comes around and dumps the flowers, there's no one there to take it out. So now it starts building up and building up. Well, what happens to flowers when they stay there for a while? They start to decompose, and decomposing leads to toxicity. That I'm kind of exaggerating here a little bit, but the point is you're going to get a buildup of some of these hormone breakdowns. And when you get that, then they can start causing damage to your DNA, or they back up. And then now they're going to start affecting other pathways, or now maybe you're going to become more estrogen dominant. You've got too much estrogen staying around in your body instead of getting excreted. Or you'll have people who run around the track so quickly that there's no chance for these people to keep up with taking the flowers out. So those are kind of two extremes. But when we talk about gene expression, especially with hormones, we're talking about how do you break it down and how do you get rid of it.
Right, and it doesn't just apply to hormones, right? But this applies to pretty much anything.
Yes, so metabolism is usually anything where there's a breakdown, but then we can talk about B12, and maybe you're not going to pick it up as well. Or vitamin C, maybe you're lacking the enzyme to make as much vitamin C. And not that we make it, but actually pick it up from our diet. Right. So there's a lot of these different components, and so the genes are essentially the person who shoots the gun and says go, and then now the hormones take off, and then what happens with it is going to be influenced by how you choose to run that race.
Yeah. So since you touched on estrogen and hormones, and it is the month of October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which, as you know, I hate the word awareness. I think that's just so disempowering. I think we all know about breast cancer enough, and that scared the heck out of us enough. It's really shift to prevention. So that's part of the reason why I was excited to have us to have this conversation in the month of October, to talk about this. So why don't we start off with how our genetics impacts estrogen metabolism, and what SNPs to look for. And by the way, we haven't really mentioned the fact that the Toolbox Genomics, the company that you've co-founded, is looking at your genetics and making specific dietary and supplement recommendations on how to mitigate, right, especially those problematic genes. Is that correct, Erika?
Correct. So we are essentially taking people who've done their 23andMe, and then we run it through our algorithm, and we're giving evidence-based specific recommendations. And so there's certain conditions that we're not doing just yet, but then we'll definitely be introducing those. But it's very comprehensive at this point.
Yeah. So we will talk about that later, where you can opt in. In fact, I'm going to post that below this video anyway for you to get into the opt-in to get on Erika's list, and there is something special there for you later. But so let's go back to the breast cancer issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think always a picture is very, very helpful. And so it's going to be tiny, but it's going to be in the show notes. And so I'm going to just plop this up here to my screen so you can see. Mm-hmm. Right here, we've got CYP1A1, 1B1, and then we're going to have COMT, and we have SNSOD, and then down here we have the GSTM. So those are 4 different pathways that your body is going to take apart estrogen. And you can have challenges in each one of those. You can have challenges in just one of them. And so this is why I really, really appreciate the fact that you were saying that cancer, this idea of cancer does not need to be a death sentence. And it's really important not to be a victim and to really actually empower yourself. Actually, it's a cleaner one. You can see I've highlighted the different ones. So you can see, just starting with simple little estrogen up here, what you end up with is actually very, very different. But you can see all these potential little potholes where something could go wrong, because all of those highlighted spots are under the control of your SNPs. So again, knowing this and knowing where you might have some deficiencies, then we can actually make some interventions. So going back here, and some of you may have heard about the different ways that you metabolize estrogen. You can actually measure it in your urine. So there's the 2-hydroxy, the 2-OH, there's the 4-hydroxy, and the 16-hydroxy. And then people talk about that if they're in a certain ratio, then it's healthier. If you have more of the 2, then that can be dangerous. If you have more 16, then that's helpful. And so these are all things that you can measure in your urine through your practitioner. And then you can see, how am I breaking apart my estrogen? And so what's really important too is that, just as we talked about earlier, that the genes are not your destiny, is let's say you are a slow metabolizer in 1A1, right up here. But you test your urine and you realize that your ratios of 2, 4, and 16 are all doing well. Well, so that means that what you are doing currently in your life, you're supporting those pathways. But just like we do a physical checkup, you want to do a checkup on what your genes are up to. And so in another year or two, then you want to recheck your estrogen levels, your estrogen metabolite levels, and see how they've changed or not changed. Because the last thing we want to do is actually start, quote, treating the genes if there's nothing going on. And so many times people say, well, I have all of these issues in my genes, and so I must do all of these things. Well, no, only if it's actually being expressed. So that goes back to your earlier question of the expression. You can measure many of those expressions with what we call biomarkers. So that could be a blood test or a urine test. And then another spot that we're going to run into issues is COMT here. And this is what you were talking about earlier, Magdalena. So COMT is another enzyme. It's also very heavily expressed in the breast tissue. That's where you find a lot of these higher concentrations of it. And it is another enzyme which takes apart estrogen further, but it also interacts with dopamine. So dopamine is that feel-good hormone. You can be a rapid metabolizer or a rapid user of COMT. So you tend to have less dopamine hanging around. You're going to break down your estrogen faster. Or you could be slow, and so you've got more dopamine sticking around, but then you also have more estrogen. And some people are right in between, and that's probably ideal, but that doesn't mean we can't work with either one. And then there's different protocols that are out there to help support these these genes, and those are going to be some of the things that we're going to be addressing on our website, just to give people some support. And then also down here, then you'll see MnSO4, so that's manganese superoxide dismutase, and then GST, and this depends on glutathione. So this one actually depends on manganese and also does a lot with selenium. And then this one over here depends on glutathione. So the reason the glutathione can be really important is because it has such a wide-ranging effect on your entire body. And it's this master antioxidant in your liver. And it does a great job of taking what we call these xenobiotics, which include estrogen. So they're foreign entities, and they're usually very lipophilic, which means they're fat-loving. And it helps break it apart so you can actually get rid of it easily in your urine.
Do you have a favorite brand of glutathione?
I do. I love either Dave Asprey's glutathione, or I also will order Empiric Labs liposomal glutathione. Okay,
awesome. I'm also using Dave's, the Dave Asprey we're talking about, that's a bulletproof glutathione, and it definitely has made a difference in my energy levels throughout the day. So Erika, let me just get this right. So if a person who's suspecting that she's got estrogen dominance going on, right, based on the symptoms, and I talked about them extensively in my resources, I'm not going to repeat those. say, you're finding yourself every month there's a PMS from hell, you can't get pregnant, whatever, right? You're suspecting estrogen dominance. What is this a woman is supposed to do? Go and get her hormones tested through urine, or come to you first, get the labs done, and then go and test? Which way, what do we do?
Well, I would say it depends what you have. So you can work, front to back and back to front. I personally, having gone through this experience with all of our family members, I really am preferential to let's see what's going on with your genes, because it's going to really impact how you're going to treat the person on the other end. So I'm biased. I really do think that, you get your data, run it through our algorithm. There are other companies out there that do it too, and find out what is the roadmap. What is Magdalena's genetic makeup? Because then we can say, okay, here are some potential problem areas, but let's just do a standard wellness panel. Let's check all of your hormones, and then let's see, and then let's put them next to each other. Because then we can say, oh, look at that, the estrogen is low. Then we check the urine estrogen, we say, wow, but the 2 and the 4 hydroxyl are really high. So this confirms what the genes seem to be indicating, which is that you're a slow estrogen metabolite. And then you would know that's where you'd want to focus. Conversely, if we had we did the same panel, but we didn't have the genetics, then we would say, well, is that from hormones? Is that from estrogens in the plastics or in the environment? Or is that just you, or is that your genetic makeup? And we can't get those answers.
Right, gotcha. And so currently in your report, because you are still in alpha beta testing, right? Like as
Correct.
we speak, and I want to just repeat, we are only in October. So if you listen to this maybe 6 months later, it might be a very different story, but it's hard to say. So where you are right now, are you reporting, like, is your report covering those markers we talked about, the COMT, the is it GST?
Yes, so we have GSTM, GSTP, GSTT, and then we will be also adding on the hormone metabolism markers as well. Yes.
Okay. All right, so that's yet to come. And if somebody signs up now and then they have a membership with you, then they're gonna get those reports further down as you're adding them onto your services, correct? To your offer.
Exactly. Yes. This is a very much of a new field, and the research is coming out by the truckloads, and so we will be updating everything and then updating you as we get that information.
Right. Awesome. So, this is huge, because this is really like, I feel like the urine test for hormones, and for me was also very eye-opening. I'm going to post a link to a lab that I like to use, Dutch tests. These guys are good in the testing for urine. And just looking at my own results, I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And then coupling that with the report from you and having the session with you, and just to seeing, like, for example, the COMP, that's the one that was a problem for me, and working on that part is just been really eye-opening.
And again, it's empowering, right? Because
yes.
Now it's not your destiny, but instead you can take the steps to change it. And to me, that's the most exciting thing about all of this.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears a little bit. Well, I know we want to talk about birth control pills, but you also mentioned about estrogen metabolism. Are we covered with estrogen dominance, or you have more stuff too?
Well, so what I do want to just touch upon is, in terms of estrogen metabolism and estrogen dominance, there's been a lot of talk about that in relation to cancer, especially, breast cancer. And so I kind of wanted to put that out there, that there have been some different SNPs that have been associated with breast cancer. And specifically, it's been CYP1B1, COMT, GSTP, and then the MNSOD. So kind of one from every category that we've talked about. But I also want to put people's fears at rest, because a recent study that came out, I think within just a couple years ago, actually looked at thousands of women, and they found that each one of these SNPs alone didn't increase your chance of getting breast cancer. Mm-hmm. Instead, if you had a combination of them. So the combination put you at a higher risk. But again, there's always that caveat, which is gene times environment. So you can always affect that, because if you're multiplying that gene times 0, and if the result's going to be 0, so now you've just taken a potential risk factor and just really reduced it. So I just wanted to make sure that people are aware of that. And when you look at the research, and then also different ethnicities have different susceptibilities. So Asians tend to be a little bit more susceptible to breast cancer if they have the MTHFR gene, versus it doesn't seem to affect Caucasians as much. So I just want to caution your listeners that when you get some of this research and you look at it, or you read about it in the news, always look at it to see who were they studying, where were they coming from, and what were the factors involved. Because it's easy to get scared.
Right.
And I don't want people to get overly scared on this.
Yeah. So let's give a couple of examples. So pick up a couple of those SNPs. They're related to estrogen, and tell us, what can a person do if she has a combination of those SNPs?
Sure. So let me actually, I'll pull it from the paper because I'll tell you. So the two combinations was CYP1B1 and COMT. So that was combo 1. And then the combo 2 is COMT and MNSOD.
And sorry, and the notes are down below. So click on it, open it up as a separate window so you know what Erika is talking about.
And we'll post the paper for you also.
Yes.
So that way you can actually look at it. So the 1B1, those people do really well with things like DIM, the cruciferous vegetables. Those can be very, very helpful for them. And another one would be for the COMT, so alcohol, you tend to be very susceptible to that. SAMe, S-adenosyl, methionine, I'm missing the last part, E-transferase, I think is it, can also help you break apart COMT. I do really want to just caution people with COMT. It's a heavy enzyme. It affects a lot of different pathways, and so I would encourage you to work with a practitioner who's well versed in that if you are a slow metabolizer, to help them step you through that, because it also affects your neurotransmitters, things like dopamine and serotonin, so and norepinephrine too. So, but definitely stress plays a big role. Alcohol, caffeine can also come into play on that one as well for the slow metabolizers. You might feel the effects more. So, and it just has to do with how you take apart that estrogen. So that's one combination. And then the other combination, again, is that COMT. So that's probably the common denominator. You can see it coming up. And then the GSTM or GSTT. And so that is the glutathione pathway. So supporting that glutathione, whether it's taking vitamin C, N-acetylcysteine, glutathione itself, you can just skip right to the source. Those are all very helpful. Selenium is also going to come into play with the SOD SNP as well. So my suggestion to people in this is, it's very easy to quickly take all of these supplements down and say, great, I'm going to order everything, let's get started. But I would encourage you to do a little more digging for yourself. You can use a company like SpectraCell or Genova. You can actually see what's going on the inside of your cells. And then that would be very helpful, because if things are at normal levels and your practitioner feels like these things are going well, then you may not need the glutathione yet. But I would say most people can all benefit from glutathione.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's just touch on BRCA1, BRCA2. Does that show up in like the 23andMe or your reports?
No. So BRCA1 and BRCA2 is a familial breast cancer. And so that one, usually it's 20% or less of the population is affected by it. It involves some pretty significant counseling before you get tested. Not everyone can get tested for it. And then again, afterwards. So that's why we're not even touching it. There's a lot that goes on with that particular gene. Okay. And it's not really considered a SNP so much as it's a gene where it's much more likely to affect you if you have it.
Okay. Okay. Right. So let's, you mentioned the use of birth control pills. and what they do to us. And this is really quite fascinating. So why don't we shift gears to that topic?
Sure. So I know I may not be very favorable with many women after this one. So birth control pills have various types of estrogens in them. They are not like the estrogens that our body produces, and they tend to bind with our receptors a little bit more tightly. So the effects that your body gets is going to be different from the actual effects that you will receive from your own hormones. But what they have found is that women who take birth control, specifically pills, for an extended period of time, especially 10 years, they do put themselves at a higher risk for breast cancer. So again, always be aware of that. But the part that I really, really found interesting was back in 2008, there was a study that came out where they actually looked at women who were on birth control pills. And then they looked at the mate that they selected. And what they found was that women were actually picking mates of similar immune complexes. They call them MHC complexes. And we really want to be as immunologically different from each other because we want our children to be really get the best of both worlds. And what's absolutely fascinating is actually I've been looking at people's 23andMe, and this is just from my private practice, and knowing the people who were on birth control pills when they selected their mate, and then looking at the genetics, actually the areas where they both had issues were very similar in a lot of cases. And so I just wonder, and this is purely my theory, are some of the issues that we're having with this rampant autoimmunity and these various conditions, is it because of the birth control pills we're actually selecting people for less immunological diversity instead of more? And so is that that part of it? And then there have been some fun follow-up studies where they've actually looked at women who selected their mates on birth control pills, and then they went off of them and they found them less attractive, and they were less attracted to them because of the pheromone suppression that was occurring. So
well, I still remember our consult, and you did it for my partner and I, and him and I are so different genetically. Like I have so many double mutations, and the joke between us is that I'm the mutant, and I'm so genetically compromised, and I'm like damaged goods. And he's like this perfect, like he had no double mutations. He had very few mutations at all. And so it's interesting. And I remember you said you've been seeing this a lot, women picking somehow, it's like a survival mechanism, right? Of us picking partners for the best survival of our for our children, except that we don't plan to have kids, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there's something stronger than what I realize.
Yeah. And so if you think about it, think about the children you would have if you were a double mutant, as you said, and so was your partner. You're stacking the odds against your children more so than versus potentially helping them. So as I said, I know I'm not going to win a lot of favors on that one. But there are other birth control methods, and I think with divorce being as rampant as it is, it may be worth taking another look at just how our hormones play a role. Because, if your PMS is out of control, or you're bleeding constantly, or you just feel overwhelmed, all of those can really adversely affect your relationships.
Yeah. One of on the to-do list is a list of articles my team and I are looking at is really writing a detailed post on birth control pills. But from even, the knowledge, that's interesting what you were saying, and just coupling that with the fact that birth control pills are nutritional muggers. They make us so deficient in so many the B vitamins. There is research showing how they alter our microbiome,
right,
significantly, right? And and then the most paradoxical, I think, is the fact that they also bind the thyroid hormone. So there's another one which makes women go heavier, bigger, and then lose sex drive. So it's like, here I am, I want to have safe sex while I'm getting fat. Desire, right? So anyway, so I think, we're speaking the truth here. And so that's really, and like you said, I'm a big fan of the fertility method. There's all these different devices that you start using that are really, I have so many girlfriends who are using the devices where they use a finger and your body temperature basically method, using that to just know your ovulation days. And I haven't heard of anybody getting pregnant for that. And so they are having like a 99.7% accuracy rate. And so there's different methods out there. It's just a matter of making the switch and doing a bit of research, educated research.
Absolutely. And actually, can I just jump in really quickly? I'm glad you brought up the B vitamins, because birth control pills, so any, it's not just birth control pills, any estrogen that you take, what they call exogenously from the outside, is going to deplete your B vitamins, especially B12 and folate. And so both of those are what we call methylators. And so they really help protect your DNA against damage or help repair your DNA. So I say that because a lot of women do take even bioidentical hormones. I mean, my mother takes it, and we always make sure that her B vitamins are adequately being supported for that. So if you are on it, make sure you're supporting your B vitamins.
Right. And so what do you recommend, like a B complex or any specific B vitamins in that mix?
Yeah, so I like Thorne's Stress B. That's a really nice combination. And then I have found that just even some B12 and folate is very helpful. This is the one I take personally, and I really, really, really like it. Mm-hmm. The reason I think this particular brand is great is because it's liposomal. So B12 is usually a water-soluble vitamin, so it goes in and out very quickly. But when it's liposomal, it's in these little fat capsules. And so that essentially lets it come out slowly over the day. And so it sustains you throughout the day. And so a lot of people who have issues, what we call our under methylators or over methylators, those are terms that you might have heard, don't seem to be affected when it's in the liposomal form versus sublingual.
Okay, awesome. So, since we talk about vitamin B, that's a natural transition we wanted to talk about today. That's methylation, right?
Right.
I think, most of us have been made aware of this whole world of genetics when it comes to the MTHFR mutations. And more, I think that's like the one that pretty much, I think most women in my community would know about, and many of them do have a problem with it. Could you just touch a little bit on it and tell us about, what can we do? What does it mean?
Sure. So MTHFR, essentially its role is to take, let me backtrack for a second. So when you consume folate in your diet or folic acid in a supplement form, it goes through a variety of transitions, and it finally gets to the end. And MTHFR is that final hurdle that it has to go through to become what they call 5-MTHF, so 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. And that's the form that the cells can use. There are hundreds and hundreds of enzymatic reactions that depend on this form of folate, including sustaining pregnancy. It's been linked to cancer, miscarriage, Parkinson's. I mean, you name it. Honestly, it seems like you name it, it's affected by folate. Now, that being said, is it just that gene that's playing the role? Probably not. I think it's certainly in there. But why it's so significant is because methylation is essentially this taking a group. It's a C with 3 H's on it, and you move it on and off of your DNA, off of enzymes, off of these little compounds. And by doing that, the body is then able to utilize it. So when you can't do that, and what they say, you can't methylate, then these potentially very helpful products that your body makes don't get to the other side. And then so now your body's compromised. So instead of dealing with a tank that's this full, maybe it's now this full. So that's why they really highlight the MTHFR gene especially. And the other reason is because the term epigenetics comes into play, where it's being passed on through the generations. And so if your mother is dealing with this much folate, and now baby has had this much folate, and they also have the mutation, then maybe it's even lower. And so that the cycle goes this way. And so that's why they're thinking that it's so significant. And it does appear to be very, very important. But I'm also finding that the gut biome plays a huge role in all of this as well. And so there's a lot of talk about the crosstalk between the bacteria and the genes turning on these genes or turning them off. So I think it's important. I think it's really important to make sure that your methylation status, as we call it, is great by making sure that that B12 level is decent, you've got enough folate, and even sometimes just eating foods that are high in folate, you can make a big difference. but you can measure methylation status in the blood. And there's a study that just came out a couple of years ago where they looked at it and they gave women folate and then they looked at their methylation in their blood. This is not something that you're going to be able to go out and ask your doctor for. This was purely for research. And they were able to show that the methylation ability and status actually declined as they took them off of folate. So important, again, it's just another tool that you need to keep track of. And it's another thing that you can personally influence tonight.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I have the MTHFR mutation as well, the single one. And, you know, and the way I look at it is that I'm a slow metabolizer, right? And it just means that I have to take a lot more caution of what I do in my life as compared to somebody who can, you know, live on burgers and pizzas and drink coffee all day long and be supposedly okay. If I live that way, I'll be under the bridge. It's just absolutely, and very sick and in and out of hospitals. So what about people who have the double mutation? That's a pretty serious one, isn't it?
Yes and no. So I would say probably about 3 or 4 years ago, the double mutation seemed very significant. And so just to explain to your listeners, the double mutation is that within MTHFR, there's two. There's C677T, and then there's A1298. And so 1298 does not affect homocysteine, which is essentially your recycling methionine converted into homocysteine, but you need B12 and folate to do that. But C677T does. And so the thought when they talk about a double mutation is that you have what they call a risk allele in both of them. And so now this pathway is really, really being compromised. The research that I've seen in human studies, it doesn't seem to be quite as awful as people have been talking about. But again, it's worth keeping track of. It's one of those things that you always want to keep at the back of your mind, because anything that depends on folate and methylation, if you're just much slower at that process, then you always want to be able to support it, because it's just such a key cornerstone in your body.
So let's talk about a couple. So you mentioned the gut, right? What can we do to support MTHFR mutation if you have single or double? So definitely supporting the gut. So taking really good care of, just in case somebody is new to this, I talk a lot about it in my work. It's really about eliminating a lot of the food sensitivities out of your gut. So stop irritating the gut digestion with all the gluten and dairy and soy and corn. For some people, it has to be more than that, like all the grains might need to go. Whatever it might be, do an elimination diet. I talk about it a lot in my programs. And then just really adding in a lot of really good stuff, right? So lacto-fermented vegetables and and good quality probiotics, nutrient really rich foods, right? Things like bone broth and livers, all the organ meats are really wonderful in that way. So apart from that, Erika, what else can we do?
So there's a lot of talk about resistant starch too, which you might find in things like plantains, the Japanese varieties.
Can I just add, it's green plantain specifically?
Yes, right. Not the yellow, super sweet ones. It has to be the green ones. And our mutual friend Grace Liu has done a lot of discussion about the resistant starches, but essentially these are starches that the bacteria break down and then they feed themselves, which allows them to multiply, which is exactly what we want. And I think people forget that we have about 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria in our guts. So taking one capsule of something that's 10 billion units is probably not going to move that switch that much. So I think working with a practitioner who's well-versed with the gut, but just be to really make sure you optimize your probiotics. But there's so much you can do, as you mentioned, on your own. And really those fermented foods are a great place to start. And then when you can couple it with some of these resistant starches, certain fibers, you have to experiment with it depending on how you feel. But things like apple pectin, some people have had good success with. Inulin can be hit or miss. But essentially, we really want to increase that fiber content because the bacteria break it down and they give us such fabulous byproducts like butyrate and short chain fatty acids that can come out of that and then keep nourishing our gut biome and help keep us healthier.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, we can keep going, I know. I always feel like I'm trying to keep these interviews within that 45-minute, 1 hour time frame, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of information here today. And then after a while, we're going to lose our listeners. So let's keep more for later. And why don't you tell us about where we can find you? What's the website and what to expect?
Absolutely. So for any of the supplements I recommended, they're all healthcare practitioner based. So I do have a separate website for that, and you can find me at endometriosisinu.com. And then there's a tab for supplements. You just go on there and set up an account, and then you'll have access to the supplements and you can order them. And then for Toolbox Genomics, it's toolboxgenomics.com. And we are, as Magdalena said, we're finishing up that alpha testing, and we're about to put everything online. And so by the time you're listening to this, if you have your 23andMe data, you can sign up with us, upload your information, and then you will get a report online that's going to be very interactive in that you can manipulate and to see what kinds of things you can do, how you can impact it. And we're trying to give a varied variety of recommendations that you can implement. And we really want it to be actionable and it's evidence-based. So there may be certain steps on there that you've heard of, but they're not on our report, and it may be because the evidence isn't strong enough that we feel confident putting it onto our report.
Great. Thank you. This was great. This was very empowering. I think that's anybody who listens to this would probably walk away with just the thought that there's so much that can be done. And everything, Erika, that you're talking about, it kind of points back to something that we all have been talking about so much, like taking care of your liver, taking care of your gut. Get to sleep early, right? Get outside and get some good quality get sun on your skin without putting a sunblock for the 15-20 minutes when you can. I mean, this is the common stuff, but then I think where this is super helpful is like really diving, like for people who really have done the basics. And I feel this is where really your service comes so much of help, is for people who have done a lot already. They don't eat Pop-Tarts for breakfast, right? They don't smoke. They don't, they try really hard and they've done it all, but things still aren't making sense. And there's still they're still not well, and they just can't figure out what it is. I feel like this is an amazing part of the puzzle that can really answer a lot of those questions, the same way that has helped me understand what's going on in my own life.
Exactly. We didn't even touch on B12 metabolism or vitamin D metabolism or any of those. And so those are all really fun things, I think, to explore, especially for people, as you were saying, at this stage in their life.
Well, then they just have to sign up for your service and then get
right.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, it was awesome having you here. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody has had learned something new today. Check out Erika's website. Get those reports going. So quick question, if they don't have a 23andMe yet, then what?
They will need to get 23andMe. If they have family tree, we can utilize family tree's data, but it's a much smaller report. Mm-hmm. But hopefully down the line, we'll be able to change that. That's in our future plans.
Okay, so go to 23andMe first, get the report, the raw data, upload it to Erika's service, and then boom, you're set. Okay, exactly. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.